Sarah Shannon. This is a really quick mini lesson video on how to implement story map elements and combine it with read-alouds to provide an environment with students. The purpose of this is to show some examples of how you can provide an environment for students in which you read aloud poems to them and you read aloud interesting stories to them. You combine it with the objective that you're working on that day, or you just read aloud and then you remember with the students and you call with them prior lessons you've done on story map elements or writing narrative stories or on summary, just to create a love of learning. As educators, we're supposed to create a love of learning, a love of listening and reading good stories and listening and reading and writing to responding to stories and poems and all that and everything. So this is a quick little read aloud just to show you an example of how you can create a love for reading and learning in the classroom. So if you look here, you'll see my story map element that I created, setting characters, problem, action events, and problem resolution. This is a really quick little, I just did that little simple little story frame, just a little story map guide to assist students that after you've done a lesson, you of course do a formal lesson on the 5 story map elements or the plot elements. You can use the plot element chart, or you can use something similar to that, just a simple. You should be able to know, the students should know the 5 basic elements of a narrative story. That's one of the characteristics of comprehension strategies that students should be able to really master and know the elements of a narrative story. That's a very effective comprehension strategy based on research. And so, if you look here, I took some samples from The Real Princess, that my story that I wrote. If you look here, and so that's a really fun narrative story that you can introduce the story elements with, and then talk to students about the setting and the problem and the action events that happen, try to solve the problem and problem resolution. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read a poem that I wrote, because the purpose of this is to not only just review very quickly the 5 story map elements, which you would walk through with your students, but let's say if you were doing this, you would do a real quick little mini lesson before you begin your lesson. And so this is Nancy and the Magic Ring that I wrote this myself. Really cute little poem. You'll like this. Nancy had a magic ring, and with it she did amazing things, like wave it boldly in the air, and servants would come from here to there. She'd wave it high, she'd wave it low, the ring could even make the wind blow. But Nancy didn't use her ring very well. She used it for a selfish gain for herself. Like once she used the ring, to make it rain and sleet and snow. The weather report was so very bad that people were forced to stay in their beds. They couldn't go out to play and to plant, and Nancy grew rich from her umbrella plant. Now, one day, the maker of the rings heard this story. He went for himself to see if it was that gory, and when he saw Nancy behaving that way, he became very angry and had some words to say. I gave you that ring to use it for good. Instead, you turned it into a ring from the hood. A ring from the hood. You're supposed to use it to be nice and kind, not to abuse it to be afraid to make people go to dine. And the ringer took the ring, and the keeper took the ring from Nancy right then, and she cried and she wailed and trembled her chin. But the keeper told Nancy that it would be best, and you'll get this ring back when you've passed every test. So Nancy went about in sadness and pain. Oh, how can I live without this ring as my gain? She went to her house and crawled into bed. If I don't have my ring, then I'm better off dead. She laid in her bed for about 20 hours, but after a while she decided to shower. Oh, maybe I should try to go make a living. To lay here all day is really just silly. So Nancy went out to find a job, but without her ring, she was worse than a slob. She couldn't type letters, she couldn't sell food, she couldn't bake cakes, and she couldn't make food. She couldn't paint pictures, and she couldn't knead dough. She couldn't rake leaves or shovel the snow. And whenever she went, it was all the same thing. Without your ring, you aren't worth a thing. And suddenly Nancy realized with great terror, I can't believe I have done this great error. My ring was what I made me so great and well off, but I didn't use it like I should. I wanted to boss. And Nancy was sorry she acted that badly. She wished she could go back and erase all her sadness. If only I had my ring once more. I used it only for good, like maybe to go feed the poor. I never used it to show off my powers. Instead, I'll give and give until it showers. And as soon as she spoke, her ring did appear, and quick as a wink, her powers were there. This is what a ring like that would look like. Isn't that a beautiful ring? Something like Nancy. And from that very day, she became very sweet. Her kindness and sweetness could never be beat. She gave so much love, she was known all around, and the kindness is all in the entire town. So that's kind of a fun little quick read aloud you can do before going to lunch, real quick, because the purpose is to try to create a love for learning and excitement about reading poems like that and reading interesting stories. And then, so you might want to read The Real Princess, My Story, which is a wonderful story similar to that. And then have the students do beforehand or afterwards a review of the story from elements if you've already done that. Quick little mini lesson, 15 20 minutes just as a review. That's a very effective teaching strategy to review prior lessons they've learned and then expand it and do other objectives you want to do. You can do this, the summary, the most important information in the beginning, middle, and the end, or whatever you want to do to extend that. Or you might want to talk about any other, if you look around, you can see, or you can take the story map elements and do, remember repetition, repeating is very, very important. So this is The Real Princess. So you can talk about, for example, you could do the Dream that Changed Sanderville, for example, to extend this particular activity. Here you go, the Dream that Changed Sanderville. That's another wonderful story that also is a story, has beautiful illustrations with it. And then it also has poem. Tradition Santa Bill. I have a copy of this on my website that also is a poem that students can read and practice themselves. And I have memorized in the drill town of Centerville. We lived one in Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was very concerned because the town just would not learn how to keep the earth so clean and free of pollutants and other atrocities. So that's, see what I'm saying? Like just creating a love of reading and learning and then making sure that you do what you're required to do as an educator, which is make sure the students master the objectives. So if you create fun stories like that and fun poems like that, the kids are going to love being in your class, and most importantly, going to be learning, especially to use my products. Have a great day.